Incredible miracle, 5-year-old boy prevents tragedy and saves 187 lives. Owen was sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by disassembled toy parts and building blocks. The small table next to him was filled with illustrated books about airplanes, trains, and bridges, all so frequently handled that the pages were beginning to wear out. He had just finished building another toy airplane, a model that imitated a commercial jet with small wings that he had adjusted himself to achieve the perfect position. Little engineer, his parents always called him proudly. From an early age, Owen had shown an insatiable curiosity about how things worked, especially aircraft. That day, Owen's excitement was on another level. He didn't know exactly why, but his parents, Ethan and Grace, had promised a big surprise. "Come on, Owen! The plane won't wait for us," Grace called from the doorway, smiling as she saw her son's concentration on fitting the last pieces of his project. Owen jumped up from the floor, grabbed his favorite teddy bear, which he always took with him on special adventures, and ran to the car where his parents were already waiting. On the way to the airport, Owen's excitement was palpable. The sky was clear with few clouds, and the sun was shining on the horizon. Ethan and Grace laughed at Owen's incessant questions about airplanes. How do they stay in the air? Do pilots need a map so they don't get lost in the sky? Will we see the stars up close from up there? Each question was more detailed than the last, and Owen was determined to learn everything he could about how airplanes worked. When they arrived at the airport, Owen was amazed. He had never been in such a large place, with so many people moving back and forth, and especially with such enormous airplanes. "It's bigger than anything I've ever seen," he exclaimed, his eyes shining as he held tightly to his father's hand. After going through check-in and security, where Owen curiously observed every detail of the process, the family finally headed to the boarding gate. The plane that would take them to their destination was already on the runway, with its lights on and engines humming softly. "It's really a jet," Owen said, almost jumping with excitement. Upon boarding, Owen went straight to the seat by the window, where he could see the wings and all the movement on the runway. He watched everything intently, the trucks moving around the aircraft, the blinking lights on the wings, and even the flight of other planes taking off. "Ready for takeoff, little engineer?" Ethan asked with a smile as he settled into the seat next to his son. Owen, without taking his eyes off the window, nodded vigorously. When the plane began to taxi down the runway, Owen felt his heart beat faster. He gripped the sides of his seat, his eyes fixed on the landscape that began to move. "Here we go," he thought as the plane accelerated for takeoff. He felt the force of the takeoff as the aircraft began to climb, leaving the ground behind. Owen watched as the houses and streets turned into tiny distant dots. "This is amazing," he exclaimed in awe as the ground grew farther away and the clouds seemed to draw closer. The sky seemed immense, and Owen lost himself in thoughts about what he might see from up above. Owen's first flight promised to be an unforgettable adventure, and he was more than ready to discover everything this new world in the heights had to offer. Owen's flight began smoothly. He was enchanted by everything around him, the soft clouds passing by the window, the infinite blue sky, and the gentle hum of the engines that lulled him into a state of pure happiness. His parents, Ethan and Grace, were pleased to see their son so happy and spent the time chatting and looking at the landscapes below. It was a perfect trip, or at least it seemed to be. As the plane progressed, the pilot, Captain Michael Sullivan, and the co-pilot, First Officer Ryan Blake, in the cockpit, monitored the sky ahead. The conditions were favorable, but they soon received a warning about a storm forming in their path. The pilot frowned, adjusting some controls while analyzing the radar. "Looks like we're in for some turbulence ahead," he said calmly to his colleague. The co-pilot nodded, beginning to prepare the aircraft for possible sudden course changes. However, the storm formed faster than expected. Dark clouds began to gather around the aircraft, and the strong wind shook the plane from side to side. In the passenger cabin, the lights began to flicker, and Owen felt the plane tremble beneath his feet. He looked at his parents, who now had worried expressions. "What's happening, Dad?" Owen asked with a touch of fear in his voice. Ethan firmly held Owen's hand, trying to stay calm. "It's just a storm, son. The pilots know what they're doing. Everything will be okay." Grace nodded, running her hand through Owen's hair in a comforting gesture, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. The plane was violently shaken by an air current, and Owen felt his stomach drop. The passengers around them began to murmur, and some were already gripping their seats tightly. The safety instructions were repeated over the loudspeakers while the flight attendants ensured everyone had their seat belts fastened. "Please stay calm," said one of them in a voice that tried to sound reassuring. Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the sky. A lightning strike hit the plane, and everything around Owen seemed to freeze. The sound of the engines momentarily disappeared, and the plane plunged into a sudden descent. The lights went out, and a sense of dread gripped everyone on board. Owen clung to his father's hand with all his might while Grace closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. In the cockpit, Michael and Ryan struggled to regain control. The instrument panel was dark, and the aircraft's main systems had failed. "We've lost all systems," Ryan exclaimed, trying to reactivate the manual controls. The pilot managed to stabilize the plane, but the situation was dire. "We need to find a way to reboot the systems, or we're in serious trouble," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, the tension was palpable. Everyone was silent, trapped in their own thoughts and prayers. Owen was scared, but at the same time, he wanted to understand what was happening. He had always known that airplanes were complex machines, and now it seemed that a failure in one of these systems was causing all this chaos. The emergency lights came on, illuminating the cabin with a soft glow. Ethan and Grace exchanged a quick glance, knowing they needed to be strong for Owen. "We're in this together, son," Ethan said firmly. "We'll get through this." The plane continued to fly, but the lack of electricity meant they were drifting. Without communication with air traffic control and without navigation instruments, the situation was critical. The pilot tried to explain the situation over the intercom but knew he needed a quick solution. It was then, in the midst of the tension, that the co-pilot mentioned the possibility of manually reconnecting the circuits. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Sullivan and First Officer Ryan Blake were fighting to find a solution. The storm had caused an electrical failure, and all of the plane systems were inoperative. "If we can't reconnect the circuits, we're in serious trouble," Ryan said, trying to stay calm. The problem was that access to the electrical circuit panel was extremely tight, designed for maintenance situations on the ground, and no adult could get through there during the flight. "The access to the electrical panels is internal, and it's extremely tight," Ryan explained. "None of us could fit through there." Michael and Ryan were running out of options when Amanda Hughes, the flight attendant who was listening to the conversation, had a daring idea. What if we used a child? Amanda suggested, her voice reflecting both urgency and the hesitation of someone who had just proposed something out of the ordinary. The two pilots exchanged glances. The idea was undoubtedly risky, but at that moment, any solution was better than none. Michael frowned, considering. With the right instructions, it could work. But it would require someone with small hands and the ability to understand what to do. Amanda nodded. I'll find someone. While the pilots continued trying to stabilize the plane with the few instruments that still worked, Amanda quickly walked through the passenger cabin. She knew she was asking for something extraordinary, but there was no other option. She needed to find a child willing to help. Excuse me, passengers, Amanda said urgently as she walked down the aisles. We need the help of a small child. Please, is there any child on board who can help us? The passengers began to murmur, confused and worried. Everyone was tense, and panic was beginning to spread. It was then that Amanda reached Owen's seat with his parents, Ethan and Grace. Owen, though frightened, was watching everything around him with keen eyes as if trying to understand every detail. Can he help? Ethan asked, holding Owen's hand tightly. Grace looked at Amanda, searching for answers. The flight attendant knelt beside Owen, trying to calm him with a reassuring smile. Owen, you've always been very curious and brave, haven't you? Amanda began, her voice firm but gentle. We're having a problem with the plane, and we really need your help. You can be our little engineer and help save everyone on board. Owen looked at his parents, who were visibly worried but trying to hide their fear to support their son. Ethan bent down to be at Owen's eye level. Son, I know this seems scary, but you've always wanted to be an engineer. Now you have the chance to be a real hero. Grace, with a trembling voice, added, You're going to be amazing, Owen. We believe in you. Owen took a deep breath. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders but also knew that his parents trusted him. What do I have to do? He asked determinedly. Amanda gave an encouraging smile. We'll equip you with a flashlight and a radio. All you need to do is crawl through a small tunnel to the circuit panel. The pilot will guide you through the radio, and you just need to follow his instructions to reconnect the wires. Owen nodded, still nervous but with a newfound sense of purpose. He had always loved taking things apart and putting them back together at home. Maybe he could do it here too. I'll try, he said, trying to sound brave. Amanda led him to the front of the plane, where the pilots were anxiously waiting. They quickly explained what needed to be done, and Owen, with Amanda's help, put the flashlight on his head and held the radio tightly. Owen, you can do this. I'll guide you the whole time, okay? Captain Michael said, trying to convey confidence to the boy. With one last look at Amanda and his parents, Owen began to squeeze through the small tunnel while all the passengers waited in silence, placing their hopes on that little hero. Owen crawled through the narrow tunnel, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The space was so tight that he could barely move his arms, and the darkness enveloped him like a suffocating shroud. He was nervous, but the determination to help everyone on board pushed him forward. You're doing great, Owen, Captain Michael said over the radio, his voice firm, trying to keep the boy calm. Keep moving, you're almost there. Suddenly, a violent turbulence shook the plane, and Owen was thrown against the walls of the tunnel. The flashlight on his head flickered, and panic threatened to take over. He felt tears start to form in his eyes as he struggled to stay calm. "Captain, the plane is shaking a lot." I'm scared," Owen confessed, his voice trembling over the radio. Michael, sensing the boy's despair, knew he needed to do something to keep him focused. He thought for a moment and decided to tell a story he knew well, a story of courage and overcoming. "Owen, let me tell you something," the captain began, keeping his voice as calm as possible. "When I was young like you, I had to face a big challenge. I always wanted to be a pilot, but there was a problem. I was very afraid of heights." Ridiculous, isn't it? A pilot afraid of heights. Owen listened attentively, momentarily distracted from his fear. "But what did you do?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I knew I had to face that fear if I wanted to achieve my dream," Michael continued. "So one day, I went to a very high place, a cliff. Up there, the wind was strong, and the ground seemed very far away, but I stood there alone with my heart racing. I looked down, feeling the fear wash over me, but then I remembered what my mother always said: courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. So I took a step forward, and then another. And before I knew it, the fear began to fade. I was still scared, but I managed to face it." Owen was silent for a moment, absorbing the story. "And did you become a pilot?" he asked. "Yes, I did," Michael replied with a smile, even though Owen couldn't see it. "And you know why? Because I didn't let fear stop me. And you, Owen, are very brave for being here, doing this for all of us. You're facing fear head-on, just like I did. And I know you're going to make it." The captain's words gave Owen new strength. He took a deep breath, focusing on what needed to be done. "I'm going to do it, Captain. I'm going to reconnect the wires," he said with renewed determination. Owen continued moving through the tunnel, now more confident despite the difficult conditions. Each meter felt like an eternity, but finally, he reached the circuit panel. With trembling hands, he held the flashlight, illuminating the colored wires in front of him. "I see the wires, Captain," Owen said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Great, Owen. Now follow my instructions. Start with the red wire. Cut it and reconnect it to the second terminal on the left side. Remember, do it carefully," Michael instructed. Owen, sweating and with his heart racing, took the small tool Amanda had given him and began working on the red wire. He remembered the captain's words about facing fear and concentrated on the task. When he finally made the connection, he felt a small wave of relief. "I connected the red wire," Owen said, his voice firm. "Perfect. Now do the same with the blue wire, but connect it to the third terminal on the right side," Michael continued, keeping calm. Owen followed the instructions, trying not to think about the turbulence that still shook the plane from time to time. When he managed to connect the blue wire, his heart filled with hope. He was succeeding. "Blue wire connected, Captain. Excellent work, Owen. Now the last one. The green wire needs to be connected to the center terminal. This is the most important one, so do it very carefully," Michael instructed, his voice serious. Owen took a deep breath, focusing all his attention on the green wire. His hands were still trembling, but he knew he had to stay in control. With one final effort, he made the connection. The green wire is connected, Owen announced. Wonderful, Owen! Now, to finish, you need to pull the main switch just below the panel. That will restart the whole system. Owen looked for the switch and, with one last push, pulled it down firmly. For a moment, the tunnel was silent, but then he heard the sound of the plane systems coming back to life. The lights returned to the cabin, and a chorus of relief echoed among the passengers. Owen, you did an incredible job, Michael said over the radio, the emotion evident in his voice. You saved all of us. Still in the tunnel, Owen heard the cheers of the passengers and felt immense relief and pride. He had done it. With the aircraft systems restored and the panic gradually dissipating, Owen, still inside the narrow tunnel, heard the celebration beginning in the cabin. He felt relieved but also exhausted. Captain Michael's voice, sounding clear over the radio, encouraged him to keep going. You did an incredible job, Owen. Now we need you to come back. We're waiting for you. Despite his fatigue, Owen began to crawl backward through the tunnel, pulling himself along with difficulty. The tight walls scraped his arms, but the thought of disappointing everyone who was counting on him motivated him to keep going. Every inch he moved felt like a personal victory. Finally, he saw the light at the end of the tunnel. With one last effort, Owen emerged from the narrow compartment and was immediately met with an explosion of applause and cheers. The plane's cabin seemed to have transformed into an impromptu party, with passengers standing up to congratulate the little hero. Grace and Ethan rushed to their son, pulling him into a tight embrace. You were incredible, my love, Grace said, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. Ethan, visibly emotional, ruffled his son's hair, saying, I've never been so proud of you, Owen. You're our little hero. As Owen was surrounded by passengers who wanted to thank him personally, a reporter who had been on board watched everything with interest. He knew he had just witnessed something extraordinary, something the world needed to hear. With his camera in hand, he began capturing the smiles and tears of relief that filled the plane, knowing that those images would be a testament to Owen's heroism. Seeing the emotion on Owen's parents' faces, the reporter approached them carefully. Excuse me, he said, trying to be as gentle as possible. I'm a reporter, and I would love to tell the story of what Owen did today. Could I contact you later for a full interview? Ethan and Grace exchanged a glance before turning to Owen. What do you think, son? Would you like to share your story so that others know what you did? Owen, still shy, looked at the smiling faces around him and then at his parents. With a small smile, he nodded. Yes, that's okay. Ethan gave his number to the reporter, who promised to get in touch. Thank you, the reporter said, genuinely moved. What your son did today is something everyone should know about. Meanwhile, the plane, now stabilized, continued its journey toward the final destination. The atmosphere on board was one of contained euphoria, with everyone finally relaxing after the scare. Captain Michael, still in command, made one last announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to our little hero Owen and the bravery of our crew, we are safe and approaching our destination. On behalf of the entire team, we thank you for your patience and courage. The captain's words were met with more applause, and Owen, sitting between his parents, couldn't contain his smile. He had done something incredible, something he would never forget. As the plane began its descent, the passengers looked out the window, relieved to see the ground approaching. When the wheels finally touched the runway, the plane was filled with one last round of applause. Everyone knew they had been part of something extraordinary that day. After the successful landing and disembarkation, Owen's family walked through the airport, still feeling the adrenaline and relief from the experience they had just lived through. Ethan, Grace, and Owen went to collect their luggage, taking the moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The airport was busy, with people hurrying back and forth, but for them, time seemed to have slowed down. "It was all so surreal," Grace commented, holding Owen's hand firmly as they walked toward the food court. "I can't believe what you did today, my love. You really saved the day." Ethan, still emotional, smiled at his son. "And to think all this happened on a simple airplane trip. I guess it shows how life can change in an instant." They arrived at the food court and chose a small cafe to sit at. Grace ordered juice for Owen and coffee for herself and Ethan. Sitting at the table, they talked more about what had happened. Owen, who would normally be talkative and full of energy, was quieter, still processing everything. "I just did what needed to be done," he said shyly, stirring his juice with the straw. "I was scared, but I knew it was important." "You were very brave, son," Ethan said, placing a hand on Owen's shoulder. "A lot of people would have been paralyzed with fear, but you went ahead and did what needed to be done. We're very proud of you." As they finished their meal, Ethan received a phone call. He answered and heard the voice of the reporter who had spoken to them on the plane. "Hello, Ethan. I hope you're all well. I wanted to know if we could schedule an interview for tomorrow. I think Owen's story will inspire a lot of people." "Of course, we can talk tomorrow," Ethan replied. "Thank you for getting in touch. We're all fine, just trying to process everything that happened." After hanging up, Ethan explained the situation to Grace and Owen. They agreed to do the interview the next day, still surprised by all the attention Owen was receiving. Shortly after, as they prepared to leave the airport, they were approached by a tall, well-dressed man with a warm smile on his face. "Excuse me, are you Owen's parents?" he asked. Ethan and Grace nodded, a little intrigued. "Yes, that's us," Ethan replied. "And you are?" "My name is Richard. I'm the CEO of the airline," the man said, extending his hand to greet them. "I want to personally thank Owen for what he did today. If it weren't for him, I don't know what would have happened. He was a real hero." Owen, a little shy, shook Richard's hand. "Thank you, sir," he said, slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "I'd like to do something special for you," Richard continued. "We, at the airline, would like to offer your family lifetime passes on any of our flights. It's the least we can do to thank you for everything." Ethan and Grace were stunned. "This is incredible!" Grace exclaimed. "We don't even know how to thank you." "No thanks are necessary," Richard said with a smile. "Owen, you saved us today. And beyond the lifetime passes, we want to make sure you can pursue your dream. I heard you want to be an engineer. Well, our company will make sure you have every opportunity to study and graduate from the best engineering school in the country." Owen, who had been quietly taking it all in, widened his eyes at the offer. "Are you serious?" he asked, almost not believing it. "Absolutely," Richard replied firmly. "We're going to invest in your education, and when you're ready, we want you to come work with us, helping to keep our plane safe just like you did today." Owen's eyes sparkled with emotion. Thank you so much, sir. This is everything I've ever wanted." Richard smiled and placed a hand on Owen's shoulder. "You deserve it, young man. I can't wait to see everything you're going to achieve." With one last thank you, Richard said his goodbyes and went on his way, leaving Owen's family even more astonished by everything that had happened that day. "This is more than we could have imagined," Grace said, still processing the offer. "Owen, you're about to make your dreams come true." Owen just smiled, feeling a mix of happiness and gratitude that he could barely express in words. He knew that from that moment on, his life was changing forever. A few weeks had passed since the incident on the flight, but the impact of Owen's heroic act was still very present. The story of the little engineer who saved the plane had spread quickly, and now a news team was at the Hutton home to record a special feature. Owen was sitting on the couch between his parents, visibly nervous with the cameras around him. The reporter, the same one who had approached the family at the airport, was in front of them, ready to start the interview. "So, Owen," he began with a smile, "do you know how many people were on that plane?" Owen looked at his parents before responding timidly, "I'm not sure, a lot, I think." "Exactly 187 people," said the reporter, leaning forward slightly. "And each one of them has you to thank for being here today." The reporter's words seemed to weigh on Owen's shoulders. He knew what he had done was important, but hearing the exact number of people he had helped brought a new dimension to what he had accomplished. His parents, Ethan and Grace, held his hands, conveying silent support and pride. The interview continued, with the reporter asking Owen to recount the events of that day. Calmly and humbly, Owen described how he had felt fear but knew he needed to help. He talked about the courage his parents had always taught him to have and how it had helped him do what was necessary. "What would you like people to learn from this story, Owen?" the reporter asked at the end of the interview. Owen thought for a moment before responding. "I think it doesn't matter if you're small or big, if you can help, you should help. And never give up, even when you're scared." Owen's words echoed in the room, and the reporter was silent for a moment, impressed by the boy's maturity. He knew that this story would touch the hearts of many when it aired. That night, the report was broadcast on national television, making Owen a relatively famous figure for a time. People from all over the country sent messages of support and thanks. Social media was flooded with comments and shares of the story of the little engineer who saved 187 lives. Owen, though a bit surprised by the attention, continued his life with the same humility and determination as always. He knew that regardless of the fleeting fame, what really mattered was doing the right thing. Years passed since the day when Owen, still a child, saved 187 lives with his courage and determination. Today, he is a grown man, one of the most renowned aeronautical engineers at the airline that once recognized him as a hero. Owen has always been passionate about airplanes, and that passion led him to dedicate himself fully to his studies and eventually to the job he had always dreamed of. Now, in his engineer's uniform, Owen walks through the hangars, inspecting every detail of the aircraft with the same care he demonstrated on that fateful day. He is respected by his colleagues, admired for his work ethic, and for his dedication to ensuring that each plane is in perfect condition to fly. His name is remembered not only as the boy who saved a flight but as an exemplary professional who takes safety seriously. As he works, Owen can't help but think about the journey that brought him here. He remembers his father's words and how his parents always encouraged him to follow his dreams. He recalls the lessons of courage and empathy he learned from a young age, lessons he still carries with him every day. During moments of pause, Owen often finds himself watching the planes take off and land. For him, each successful flight is a small victory, proof that his work makes a difference. And in his mind, he knows that despite all his achievements, his greatest victory was the day when, still a boy, he made the right choice in a moment of crisis. One sunny afternoon, Owen receives a visit from a group of children on a school field trip. He approaches to talk to them, sharing stories about his work. When one of the children asks what inspired him to become an engineer, Owen smiles and replies, "One day, I had the chance to do something that really mattered. I realized that with courage and determination, anyone can make a difference." As the children listen, fascinated, Owen realizes that just as he was inspired when he was a child, now it's his turn to inspire the next generation. He knows that the path hasn't been easy, but every challenge was worth it. When the day ends, Owen looks toward the horizon, where the planes cut through the sky, and feels at peace. He knows he is exactly where he should be, doing what he has always dreamed of. And as he heads home, he knows that whether in the skies or on the ground, he will continue to make a difference, one flight at a time. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.